to participate much more than what we just did, and you'll be speaking with each other, but after we look at a set of questions and speaking techniques for answering part 3 questions. It is 10 minutes before 7 right now. I will see all of you here at 7 p.m. exactly, and we will continue on with part 3 questions. Then you're going to get together and you're going to practice questions together as well. Okay, students, so take a break. I'll see you in 10 minutes, 7 o'clock. Okay, students, so we finished just on time there, right before 6:50. So that was a good time in getting through the first part of the lesson. I know it was a little rapid fire pace there, but it was good to hear all of you at least get a chance to speak. And again, just to introduce some figurative language to you. Before we go into techniques for answering speaking part 3 questions, I want to say one more thing about figurative language. Please never go into the speaking part of the exam loaded up with these 10 phrases or 5 phrases that you think you're going to use no matter what, because that's what we notice some students doing, especially though candidates. When I see candidates, I mean people like yourselves that are going to take the test. Candidates that are usually at a 6.5 lower, 6 and lower even, they come in with this handful of idioms they saw, raining cats and dogs, and they're going to use it no matter what. And the examiner sniffs that out right away. You know, you can tell when they're being used naturally or not. So just as a heads up, between part 1 and part 3 of speaking, if you're using between 3 to 5 figurative language phrases or words, everyone says idioms, metaphors work just as well. Okay. Idioms are phrases that don't make sense out of the context they're used in. Metaphors are a comparison without using is or as or like. Just look up figurative language. Even examiners argue between themselves. Was that an idiom or not? But it doesn't really matter. They're looking for you to use figurative language. Okay, so don't get caught up just on that idiom thing. And using it in a way that a native speaker would use it. So if you're using these again out of place, then it could be detrimental to your score. So again, use the ones you're confident with. When you have a chance looking at these slides later with some of those phrases I shared, and I can give you more lists later to look at, use ones that are really flexible type of sayings that you can use in most situations, like the one we saw there, I'm on the fence. You can use that for so many questions in IELTS when they ask you, what do you think about that? Well, I'm kind of on the fence. And this way, I think it's good. And that way, I think it's bad, right? You're in the middle somewhere on an opinion. Okay, so try to use the ones that are more neutral. I'm just saying that because I don't want to go into speaking part 3 and hear these being overused too much. Use them where you think they're appropriate. Okay. All right. Let's go into techniques for answering part 3 questions for speaking. The first thing, of course, it sounds very obvious, but you want to answer the question, give a direct answer to the question, straight out if you can. All right. You don't want to be dilly-dallying around what was just asked of you. Now, in a moment, I'm going to share with you some ways that you can give yourself a few extra seconds to think before you answer. Because believe me, a lot of these IELTS questions, native speakers would have to think a second before they just start talking. But it's the way you take a moment to think and what you say, the phrases you use while you're thinking, that will either help your score or not. We'll talk about that. But anyway, step 1, answer the question. Step 2, define the reason behind your specific point of view. All right. It's just like you're writing a paragraph here. You give your topic sentence and the reason behind it. You're going to see examples for all these steps in just about 5 seconds. Okay. So let's just go through them. And then you're going to give an example if you can to support your point. Make sure your example is relevant to the reason that you gave. And the way that you make sure it's relevant is you conclude with a sentence that connects your ideas and your examples to the matter of the question, which means to the gist of what was asked of you. Okay. Does this have to be 4 sentences? Absolutely not. Can some of these steps be combined together? Sure. But this is generally, you want to go from giving an answer to the examiner, telling them why you think that way, give an example to support that, and then round it back off to your original answer. Let me give you an example here. Let's say the questions are advertisements. Okay, so this is commercial. And now I say advertisements. UK would say advertisements. Either one's fine. I'll stick with my native tongue here and go, are advertisements a good or bad influence on children? Okay. And let's go through the steps. First, answer the question. So the speaking is actually in green here. This is what you could say. To be honest, I think advertisements mostly have a negative effect on children. Okay, that should be effect, by the way. Define the reason behind your specific point of view. So you've said that they have a negative effect. That should be with an E, effect. Define the reason behind your specific point of view. Not only do they encourage children to be materialistic, that's one reason you're giving, but they also create unrealistic expectations. Okay. The not only but style. This is something that's very useful in your writing, especially, let's say, in your conclusions, to give 2 reasons in one complex sentence structure or compound sentence structure in this case. Okay, so not only do they do this, A reason, but they also do that, B reason. Now, if you give these 2 reasons, you need to further explain both of them. So we have children are materialistic, and they commercials create, or the advertisements create, unrealistic expectations. Okay, sounds good, but you need to have more detail. That's your next step. Give examples or an example to support your point. What do you mean they create unrealistic expectations? Well, first of all, about materialistic. For instance, younger children are depicted as being cool in commercials if they have the latest video games. Okay, that's the idea of materialistic, putting value on material things and relating that to your personal value. You are worth what you own or what you have. Okay, so that's been explained in one sentence. Now, the idea of these commercials create unrealistic expectations. Well, while teenagers are told they will be better respected if they have a perfect physical physique. Okay, physical physique, what does that mean? It means a perfect shape, let's say by working out. I think that's a little repetitious, but we'll go with it. Physical physique. I think you could just use physique in this case. But the idea is these commercials tell children their bodies have to be perfect, and then they will be better respected. Well, that's unrealistic, right? Nobody's perfect. So that's unrealistic expectations. Both of these reasons have been addressed in that one example. And to round it off, concluding with the sentence, let me move you guys here. You're my way. I can't see what I'm reading. With the sentence to bring it all back around, right? Basically your result. As a result, many children feel socially inadequate if they can't live up to the standards these advertisements are promoting. What you said in your very first sentence is, to be honest, I think advertisements have a negative effect, effect. Result, many children feel socially inadequate. They feel socially inadequate. That's a negative effect if they can't live up to the standards. Okay, so again, the answer, example, a reason, example, and the result that brings it back around. All right. Can be more or less than 4 sentences. I would say you never want to really get beyond 7 sentences as a general rule on part 3. The examiner has no card there that says over 7x, but just through years of experience, we can say that once students get past 7, they're carrying on too long. Okay, answer the question, example, results, and get yourself out of there. Because the longer you ramble on and the longer you keep speaking, the more opportunities you are giving yourself to make mistakes. Okay, so be straight to the point. You can see in these 4 sentences here, what do we have? We have 1, 2 complex sentence structures in there, right? 4 sentences. This is fine. This answer would be more than adequate to get an 8 or higher. Okay, it's not how long you speak, it's how well you answer the question. Okay, here's the questions we'll be looking at here. I'm sorry. First, stall tactics before we get to the questions about marriage. I told you before, we're going to look at ways to give yourself time to answer that question. And like I said, even for native speakers, some of these questions are not easy to give an answer to immediately, right? In part 3, you don't have a minute to take notes. Okay, you have to answer as quickly as possible. So here are some ways that you can give yourself time that won't be detrimental to your band score. Okay. Now, if you said, that's going to hurt your band score, that's considered unnatural pause, all right, or unnatural time to think. So instead of the really long like that, a small is okay, but say something rather than just hemming and hawing. For example, one classic is, pardon me, can you repeat the question? Now, you don't want to use this too often. You will irritate the examiner if you ask him to repeat every time he asks you a question in part 1 or part 3. Part 1 shouldn't be a problem for you unless you honestly didn't hear what he said, in part 1. But the part 1 questions you should have an answer to pretty quickly. Part 3 is where you heard what he said. You can't think of an answer right away. You absolutely can ask a couple times if the examiner can repeat the question, and you won't be penalized. Okay, but you don't want to use that too often. Computer-based test, or in the case that you are thinking of something and it's on the tip of your tongue, but you can't get it out. That's a really interesting question. Let me think, and then get to your answer. So while you're saying, that's a really interesting question, let me think, and then you start, that phrase right there is better than an or an okay? And while you are saying, that's a really interesting question, let me think, you are actually taking that time to digest what we saw earlier, what was said to you, understand, and then give an answer back. Okay, so a lead in to say that's a really interesting question. Don't say it every question. Not all the questions are that interesting, but the ones you might need time to think on, you can say that. Again, repeat the question to them. This is not you saying repeat the question. Look where my quotation marks are here. Okay, let's see. How do commercials impact children? Well, first of all, and then give your answer there. So they ask you the question. You are repeating the question back. You will never be penalized for this. In fact, this can help your lexical resource score, your LR score, because you are showing the examiner you can take what he said to you and you can repeat it using different words. You can paraphrase. Okay. Now, if you use some of the same words, of course, not a problem. But the idea of taking what they said and repeating it back to them, let me think, how do commercials affect children? Well, first of all, it gives you extra time to think. Okay, so again, another stall tactic. Stall means to give yourself time before you start speaking. And the last one, okay, we'll allow a little bit of a I've never really given that much thought, right? So again, that can work for any question. And then, but in this case, but I would imagine that commercials, advertisements, right? So I'll give it to you one more time. I've never really given that much thought, but I would imagine that commercials. So while you're going through the and I've never given it that much thought, you're trying to get that first reason in your head. So by the time you get around to, I would imagine that commercials, you have something there, and you'll be surprised how fast your brain works. Okay. Sometimes these stall tactics, they can be quite useful, and they're better than you hemming and hawing and not having anything to say. All right. So think about those stall tactics when we do our questioning today, especially during the live questions at the end. Now, we're pretty good on time. Here are the questions we're going to talk about today. You can hear me